than the original Ora et Labora of Saint Benedict. Okay. Now, it was a powerful form of reform. Okay. We see several reforming popes coming out of Cluny that really start to turn the church around. Although it's a huge uphill battle. I mean, we think of the priestly scandals of our own time, which have just really shaken our church here in America. Well, not to belie the seriousness of our modern problems. Here in the Middle Ages, we're having an incredible corruption in the church due to feudalism. Okay. And that is why Cluny made itself dependent only on the Holy Father. But what you're seeing is, especially in the country parishes and things like that, priests that were openly living with concubines and raising their illegitimate children and charging prices for sacraments. Okay, so I mean, talk about shutting you off from the church. And what's amazing is the medieval church, although yes, they took scandal of that. We'll talk more about the repercussions of anti-clericalism that formed because of these scandals. But there's also, to give credit to the Catholic laymen who could still, the faithful ones, could still see, even if this man's a sinner, the sacraments are still from Christ, I still receive Jesus. And that's what we're going to see is the difference between, say, a Peter Waldo, who criticizes the church and rejects the priesthood, and St. Francis of Assisi, who will kiss the hand of the sinful priest, and by his humble reverence will actually win the heart of that priest and convert that priest. So the difference between a heretic and a reformer. Okay, but that's towards the end of the lecture. Okay, so Cluny, as I said, very powerful reform movement to try to shake the church free of the shackles of lay investiture, kings trying to interfere with church affairs, and also the scandalous behavior of some of the secular priesthood. Okay, so Cluny did a great job. We have Gregory VII, who really starts to turn around and reform the church. Now, at first, his reform is not very successful in the sense, if you look at, he made these decrees and they were generally ignored, or people who actually tried to carry out the reform were murdered. So it was a lot of hard hearts there. However, Gregory did get the ball rolling as far as the start for reform. We'll see later popes do the same. But unfortunately, even Cluny is going to succumb over another 100 years. Okay, what happens is their tremendous wealth that they're getting, because they're getting all kinds of gifts and accolades from everybody. Well, the reform is going to, human beings are human beings. And, wealth and power tend to corrupt, even holy monks. Well, there's one holy monk of the Cluniac reform who was Saint Robert of Moulins. And Moulins was a Cluniac monastery. Okay, but he tried at first to reform his own monastery and was met with absolute stonewall. Okay, well, he had about 20 like-minded men in the monastery, and so they went to the baron who owned Citeaux and said, can we have your swamp? Can we have the valley of Wormwood, the Vallée de Absinthe? And he said, well, I have this much better property over here. Don't you want it? He says, no, we only want enough farmland to take care of us. We don't want any wealth. We are going to be pure simple. We're going back to the Benedictine ideal. So they go to Citeaux, which is literally a swamp. And they dig it out and they drain it and they start to live a very austere Benedictine life. Like no meat, milk, or dairy products, basically boiled vegetables and like cabbage and, carrots and totally. Okay, so if you would, vegan lifestyle. if you want to put it in modern terms. Okay? In fact, they were so poor at the beginning, they actually lived on boiled birch leaves for a while. That's pretty tough. Okay, well, the Pope saw what Robert was doing and immediately pulled him back out to go back and reform his own monastery of Malin. So Alberic, St. Alberic was the next abbot of this monastery, and he worked very hard to get it established, but then Alberic died, and so we have the British monk Stephen Harding, who, well, it's such a tough life that nobody's joining. And the original 20 monks, they're getting all the mosquito-borne diseases and things like that. And Stephen Harding is like, Lord, do you really want this? So he actually put one of the monks that was dying under obedience to come back and tell him if this is really God's will. And the monk came back and says, don't worry, it's God's will, God's sending relief. And that relief is going to be St. Bernard with 30 of his relatives. Okay, so here's a picture of modern Citeaux. Now, these monasteries, Cluny, Citeaux, Clairvaux, were all destroyed during the French Revolution. So there's only a little bit of, ruins left, or like wine cellars that didn't get destroyed. So what you see is rebuilt since then. Okay, so let's talk about St. Bernard. Okay, so St. Bernard was the third son of Tescelin the Tawny of Burgundy, and or Fontenay is his actual castle. And then his mother was Alyth of Montbar. Very, very powerful. In fact, his father was the most powerful baron of Burgundy. Now, his two older brothers were knights, and his father was, an officer in the army, fierce fighter, things like that. Now, on the other hand, both Tescelin and Alyth were holy. In fact, they were both beatified. Okay? And Bernard was a little bit more sickly than the other boys, and so he was sent to higher education. He had a brilliant mind, and his mother died suddenly when, actually during the family feast, he his life was shook up, right, about 21. And so he started to seriously think about entering religious life. Now, and of all the ones that he wanted to enter, it's kind of like his brothers are saying, there's Cluny, great, let's go there. And he says, no, I want Citeaux. I want penance. I want prayer. And they tried to dissuade him from that. Now, his father was open to a religious vocation, but he's going to say, they eat roots, and they don't eat any meat. Are you kidding? You're a sickly boy, And he said, no, I want to go. Well, his brothers, who were both fighting men, especially his brother Gerard, did not understand why he was doing that. He said, well, eventually he'll understand. Another one of the brothers he was talking to, while he was talking to him, I think it was Andrew, his mother appeared to them and said, go to the cloister. Okay, so it's like, all of a sudden he's got one of his brothers on board immediately. Okay, well anyhow, he ends up talking 32 of his relatives to go with him. However, they spend some time at Fontenay to discern if this is really God's will. He doesn't just rush in. And 2 of them do discern that they don't have a vocation. But Tescelin all of a sudden loses 4 of his 6 sons to Citeaux, as well as Bernard's cousins and friends from school. Okay, so they show up at the Citeaux door, right when Stephen Harding is despairing of the success of the monastery. And from that time on, it just grows. In fact, some of Bernard's friends try to come to dissuade him, and they just get converted and they join too. Okay, in only 3 years, it tells you what a great leader Bernard was. The monastery had gotten so big that they had to do a daughter house branch off from it. So Bernard was, even though he was like only 24, 25 years old, is going to found Clairvaux. And again, in a great austerity, in fact, so austere that the local bishop who came in to check on him saw that if Bernard didn't get some rest and help, he was going to be dead. So he was under obedience, had to rest for a full year. Unfortunately, the quack that took care of him kind of ruined his digestion because of what he fed him. It was supposed to heal him, but it actually made his stomach, ruined his stomach. So for the rest of his life, he was plagued with incredible stomach pains. And I don't need to go into detail of what he had to do to relieve himself, but let's just say wherever his abbot chair was, they dug a hole so that he could take care of himself. Anyway, so despite this, I mean, if you looked at him, this young, emaciated man, you would think he would have not had much time here on earth, but he actually lived to be 63 years old. So he founds Clairvaux in 1116, and he, at this point, kind of becomes the conscience of his age. When he sees a priest, it doesn't matter how big you are. If you're the Pope, you're still going to get a letter of correction, although with respect and due reverence. If you're the local priest who's doing something you're not, you're going to get a letter from Bernard too. Okay, so, and what's interesting though is because of his humility, his tact, he was able to win people over. Some people that you would think that would, kings that he would correct, you'd think they'd just walk off his head. Instead, they listen to him and reform. I mean, he's amazing. Okay? So he preaches in Burgundy, and eventually, one of his own monks becomes Pope and takes the name Eugene III. Okay? Now, this Pope will then proceed to ask Bernard to preach the Second Crusade. Okay? And unfortunately, that crusade will end in total disaster. And Bernard will get a lot of flack for doing it. But, why did he do it? He did it under obedience to the Pope, and he did it because of the same reason why the Crusades would be done in the first place, is to win back the Holy Land and to strengthen the kingdom of earth, or kingdom of Christ on earth. Okay, so that was his motive. It wasn't, wealth or power or anything like that. I mean, think about it. This guy's living on roots and cabbage in a swamp, He's not exactly for earthly power, if you understand what I mean. Okay, now eventually he will die at Clairvaux in 1153, although for a monk who has a vow of stability, he's traveling all over the world, and in fact, he will reconcile the Pope to the different kings of the time period. Also, there was a little bit of a schism with an anti-pope named Anacletus II, and he has the backing of Roger of Sicily. Okay, so there's a back and forth fight going on there. And the Pope will basically use Bernard to heal that schism. And he will go around and he will go to Germany and reconcile the emperor to the Pope. He'll go to France and get the French to recognize the real Pope. And in fact, when Anacletus dies and Felix IV is elected, he is so convinced that Bernard's right that he actually runs out of the papal palace that Roger had for him and goes to Bernard and says, I repent of being elected Pope, anti-Pope, please reconcile me with the real Pope, and things like that. So Bernard was responsible for mending that schism. Now, obviously I could spend the whole class just here, but I need to move on. Okay, so the Cistercians, and here would be an example of Clairvaux. This is the floor plans of Clairvaux, and then the one surviving area of the Clairvaux monastery is this wine cellar. Now what you can see is it's definitely Gothic, but you can also see how simple it is. By the way, the Cistercians differentiate themselves from the other Benedictines by wearing white. Or, well, it's really what it is unbleached wool, okay, instead of dyeing it black like the Benedictines do, okay. And by the way, from this time on, white indicates reform and purity, okay. we're going to see the Dominicans will adopt white as well for the same reason. And by the way, there is a Cistercian connection between St. Dominic and the Cistercians. Just on a side note, every single Cistercian monastery harnesses water power. And it's, this is, not church history, but just technology is, the monks were very innovative in harnessing water power to not just mill the wheat, but tan hides. They also invented something that would be the precursor of the blast furnace to purify iron, etc., etc. And they shared this technology not just with other monasteries, but with the people. So just on the side note, the monasteries were causing progress just in quality of life for everybody in the area. Okay, but I can't go there either. Okay, I need to keep moving. Okay, well that was what I wanted to cover last class, and how do you say, ran out of time. But I didn't think I could do that in 5 minutes, and I didn't. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the mendicants, which is the title for this class, right? So, monks, mendicants, and masters. So, the mendicants, how the begging friars renewed and defended Christendom. And this is something to realize. It's, we've been going, if you remember last class, we were talking about the Dark Ages and just wave upon wave of barbarians coming in and destroying civilization and monks building it back up, okay? Well, you'd say probably starting with the year 1050, we start to have what we would call the emergence of Christendom, really Christian culture. And for roughly 300 years, Europe will be Christendom. Okay, so that is the majority culture is going to be Christian. We're going to see almost no adult baptisms except for maybe on the frontiers of missionary areas. But now we're going to go and see infant baptism. Children born into a Christian culture, being raised in a Christian culture, living and dying in a Christian culture. Okay. Now, just like our own culture, just because it's a Christian culture doesn't mean that there aren't saints and sinners in it too, right? So corruptions, as I was mentioning earlier, but at the same time, bright lights and saints. Kind of like our own church, right? There are really good people, there are mediocre people, and then there are bad people, and we're all part of the church. Hey, that's from the beginning, right? St. Paul talks about the leaven of wickedness, even present in the first generation of Christians. Okay. All right, so the context of the rise of mendicants. What we could say is that monks are basically the phenomenon of the countryside, because if you're going to raise crops and be self-sufficient, you're going to be living in the country. And so what's happening is in the big cities, we're seeing a shift in culture that's taking place, going from the chaos of the Dark Ages into feudalism, but now feudalism is going to be falling apart and crumbling. And we're going to see huge societal shifts taking place, right? Going from an agricultural-based economy into a trade-based economy, right? As the Crusaders are coming back into Europe with Eastern products, we're going to see a demand for the trade, and we're going to see the rise of a bourgeois or middle class group of people that have money not because of land, but because of trade. And so there's this is shaking the whole thing. It'd be almost like the Industrial Revolution taking place in the 1800s, if you understand what I'm talking about. So a lot of cultural shifts. Now, some of these things are going to have to back up a little bit and go back to 700, and then I'll try to move us back up to 1050, 1100. Okay? So, first of all, the context of, I didn't really cover this enough. I mentioned it last class, is the Muslims are coming up through North Africa into Spain, as well as barbarians coming from the east and the north. Okay, so the rise of Islam. Now, if we go back the Byzantine Empire, the Western Empire fell, right? We said that already, what was it, 476? I might have my date off exactly, but maybe some of the Latin teachers can confirm that I'm right, I don't know. Anyway, and that's what we would say is the beginning of the Middle Ages, okay? Now, where am I? In the Byzantines won't fall until the 15th century, okay? It will be well into the Renaissance before they fall, okay? Now, in the case of the Eastern Empire, they will shrink down to a very small amount, but right before the Islamic push, we're going to see a very strong emperor, Emperor Julian, who will retake a lot of the territory and almost completely restore the Roman Empire in its glory. Now, unfortunately, he basically levied huge taxes on people. Part of that was because there's this huge tug of war between the king of Persia, pagans, and the Eastern Empire. And he was like pouring in all kinds of money to fight that war. And in fact, the coffers were so low, I mean, people were being blood dry with taxes. They resented, they did not see Byzantine rule as a positive thing, because they were being sucked dry by the empire. But his coffers were so low that he actually took a loan out from the church. Now, excuse me, by this time it's Heraclius who's emperor, okay, Justinian is dead. But anyhow, what happens is he takes a loan from the church to pay his troops. Well, when people hear that money that they gave to the church was being used to wage war, there's a huge outcry. At which point, the emperor, instead of paying back the loan in 10 years, paid back the loan in 1 year. So he basically broke the bank to honor his debt. Now, with that, we're going to see the Islamic force coming in right when the Byzantine Empire is weak in this area. Okay. Now, who's Muhammad? Just a real quick run through. I don't want to, spend my 75 minutes just here. Okay, so Muhammad is born somewhere around 580, and he will die in 632 in Medina. He is born in Mecca of a poor family. Now, a poor branch of the ruling Quraysh family who runs Mecca, okay? He's raised by his uncle for a while, and then his uncle dies when he's about 8. He loses his parents, then he loses his uncle, and, that's going to cause some psychological damage. Anyway, he also, there is some evidence that he might have been epileptic. Now, he's a shepherd. Eventually, in his adulthood, he becomes a camel driver. Now, Muhammad is very interested in religions, and as he makes the caravan routes around Saudi Arabia, he goes to different oases. Now, these different oases are basically enough surface water for maybe a family or two to live, right? So, Saudi Arabian desert with maybe a place where you can stop and get water and move on. Obviously, these little oases are going to be miniature cultures, right? So he'd stop at one oasis, he might meet Jews, and so that evening he'll talk to them about the Jewish faith and what's the Bible saying, things like that. However, he never knew how to read, right, or write. He basically was soaking in these things from oral tradition. Unfortunately, he never came across a Catholic oasis. And in actual fact, Catholics did live in Saudi Arabia at this time. However, where he went was Nestorian Christians who said that Jesus is two persons, right? Nestorian heresy is the man Jesus was possessed by the Spirit of God. So that's the only Christianity that he hears about. However, he also hears about all sorts of Gnostic stuff, like or the Proto-Evangel of Mary. So he was of the belief that Jesus did make little clay birds, clap his hands, and they flew off. That type of thing happening. Okay. He heard about Mary's virgin birth, virgin conception of Jesus and things like that, and he believed it. He also heard from the Jews that there was a Messiah that was going to come. And all of this, of course, is percolating in his head when he, at the age of 25, marries the widow Khadijah, who's a couple years his senior. They will have a daughter named Fatima, yeah, okay. And when he's about 40, he's fasting and praying to try to, figure out all the stuff that he's heard. And he comes up with, he has a vision of the angel Gabriel, who appeared to Mary, Now, that's what he claims. It could be that's what he was thinking about, and my understanding is epilepsy, whatever you're thinking about, can become very real, and you kind of have visions of it. I do not know personally, but that's what I've heard. So we're going to presume that this initial vision that he purportedly had was a sincere experience. Okay, that's what he thought, and he went home and told his wife. Okay, but I don't know how you make sense out of, "O Muhammad, thou art the messenger of God, take and read," since he can't read. But anyway, that is the belief of Muslims. Okay, so now he tells his wife Khadijah, she believes him. Pretty soon he's got about 70 relatives of his that believe him. Well, he's getting in trouble with the Quraysh because they're not worshiping the pantheon of Arabic idols that are in the Kaaba. Kaaba is actually very ancient, okay, much older than Muhammad or Islam. Okay, now because they were cutting into their income, they were starting to persecute Muhammad and his followers, and so they fled to Yathrib, which later was called Medina, and that is where Muhammad will consolidate his religion. Okay, and that flight took place on July 6, 622 AD, and that is, as far as Muslims are concerned, that is year one. Okay, so if you're in Arabia, you're probably going to see the dating subtract 622 years from 2016, and you'll have their calendar. Okay, now the Quraysh of Mecca war with the followers of Muhammad in Medina for about 5 years, and then Medina capitulates when Muhammad cuts a deal with them. Basically, is we'll still keep the Kaaba as the center of devotion and pilgrimage. But now we're going to say Abraham and Ishmael built it, and that the stone that's in there was given by God to Abraham. And also Muslims are required to sometime in their life perform the Hajj, as in make a pilgrimage around September during the month of Ramadan, etc., and pray there for 7 days, and then throw stones at a couple of pillars that represent the devil, and they wash their shroud in the waters of the oasis at Mecca, and they are considered haji, or saints. Okay, and so their, if you would, salvation is tied up, and just when they die, they need to be wrapped in that shroud that was washed in the waters at Mecca. Okay, now he himself dies on June 8th, 632, and the second holiest spot for Islam would be Medina, where the Prophet is buried. Okay, now, just really quick, we see that the doctrine is a combination of Judaism, Nestorian Christianity, and Arabic paganism. So you're going to see angels and jinns, genies, all mixed together in the Quran. Okay, it is his successor, his son-in-law, Abu Bakr, who marries Fatima, who becomes the next leader of Islam, and it is Abu Bakr who's going to order all the things that Muhammad said correlated into the Quran, the writings. There are 114 surah, or chapters, in the Quran, and then there also would be the traditions and the hadith, which would be stories about what Muhammad was like when he was alive. Okay. The creed, as you can see there, by the way, if you say that creed 3 times in front of a Muslim witness, you're converted. Okay? And that is basically when they're saying convert or die, they're expecting you to say it 3 times in front of them, or submit to their rule, whatever. So the jihad, now they would say that jihad, it means striving. Okay? So jihad might be your personal striving to obey the Quran. The jihad could also be like going on pilgrimage to Mecca. But part of jihad was also expanding the religion through warring against unbelievers or infidel. Okay, and when they did take over a new territory, as we're going to see, the military push under Abu Bakr is going to be 2 prongs. One up through the Holy Land and then one through North Africa. And 50 years after Muhammad's death, we're going to see Palestine, Holy Land, Turkey, Egypt, and most of North Africa, and even into Spain, completely conquered. So military, if you would, spread of this religion. Okay, now other practices, now where they conquered, there's basically, and by the way, this is ISIS today too, the Caliphate there are basically two kinds of lands. Those under submission to Islam and those who aren't. So the realm of peace, Islam, the realm of war, those who aren't Islam yet. Okay. So, and the choice for those that they conquer is death, submission, as in you become part of the dimitude, you pay, if you would, an unbeliever tax, and you become a second-class citizen in their realm, or you convert to Islam. Okay. Other practices would include abstaining from wine, pork, and gambling. It's interesting, we went to Fatima on pilgrimage. Guess what the favorite meat in Portugal is? Is pork. Why? It's because they were under Islamic rule for so long. It was kind of their little protest to be under their rule. Okay, so that's the main meat in Portugal. Okay, so they forbid depicting any living thing. So you can see the Quran, all of the arabesque type decorations there on the side. And now, the Persians, when they converted to Islam, they didn't quite follow that rule. So if you see any Quranic manuscript that has like a picture of the Prophet, now he'll be depicted with gold leaf fire over his face. But those are Persian manuscripts, because the Persians basically ignored that iconoclasm. Okay, and then the Quran says that a man can have up to 4 wives, of course. If somebody's wealthier and more powerful, they can have a harem of 100 or more. And then women, now technically there are parts of the Quran who say that women are equal to men, but it also says in the Quran a woman should not stand upright before a man. Okay, so it's kind of basically, and it's not really clear how women are saved or what the reward is. But men are going to get the 96 hurries and things like that. But it would be understood that the women are saved, but it's not really clear what they get when they get to heaven. Okay. Now, if we look at the conquest of Islam, Abu Bakr, as I say, the chosen successor of Muhammad, is going to send a commander towards the promised land, and then one that's going to go through North Africa. And this is going to be Khalid bin al-Walid, 632. And there's a revolt of Yamama, which would be an Arabic oasis. They were Islam, but they reject it, and they go back to whatever they were before. And so Khalid is sent to retake the city. Now, his terms of surrender with the city is, if you repent and return to Islam, I won't massacre you. But Abu Bakr, who is ignorant of this orders the slaughter of all apostates. Now, when he hears Khalid's terms of surrender, he rescinds that order, but the message is loud and clear. To abandon Islam is to be killed. And say Father Pakwa talks about how in Egypt and other places, there's probably about 1 million conversions from Islam to Christianity that happen every year, but we don't hear about it. It's wise they keep it quiet so their families aren't endangered because of their conversion. So the one Egyptian journalist who was baptized by Pope Benedict in 2008, that's a rare exception of a Muslim who converts to Christianity that makes it public. Okay. Now, there's also the Battle of the Yarmouk River. What happens is the Islamic forces are spreading rapidly and taking over ground, so the Bishop of Jerusalem is saying to the Eastern Emperor, help, help, we're being attacked. So he scrapes up some money, sends the army down there, and, well, during a sandstorm, the imperial troops hunker down. But Khalid is used to fighting in a sandstorm, and so he attacks and completely exterminates the Byzantine army. And so, well, Jerusalem, Alexandria, and the whole east falls under Khalid. Similar story happening along North Africa, and unfortunately, even the Christians are actually seeing Islam as liberators because of the huge burdensome taxes of the Byzantine Empire. So that's part of the reason why they could conquer so easily. Okay, and when they get to the streets of Gibraltar, there's actually a Christian count who is answerable to the emperor who sells out. Now he thinks it's just a raid, right? Raid, get money, come back. But Islam's there to stay, and in fact, they will not get kicked out of Spain again until 1492. Okay, 700 years of Islamic rule in Spain because of this traitor. Okay. Now, it seems as if the Muslims are an unstoppable force, but what we'll see is at the Battle of Tours, Charles Martel, well, Charles the Hammer, with his Frankish knights. If you remember, Clovis got converted, so yes, he's the, if you would, the officer of the army for the Merovingians, and he will stop them, and then he and his son and his grandson will gradually push the Muslim forces in free lands. Charlemagne will succeed in getting back the Spanish marches, and then Portugal will fight for its independence. Okay, so that's one part of the context. Can you see I'm building to the Crusades? Okay. We also have, in 1054, the Eastern Schism. Now, the remote causes, just really, I'll try to do this sketchily because I don't have a lot of time, but here we go, is obviously the first nail in the coffin was when Constantine moved the capital from Rome to Constantinople. Sylvester I refused to go with him. And, okay, sorry. Okay, Constantinople, in other words, Sylvester kind of did a compromise and saying, okay, I'm staying in Rome. Where Peter is, there's the church. Ubi Petrus, Ubi Ecclesia. But he does make the compromise of saying that the Patriarch of Constantinople will be second after himself. Now, of course, that is going to make all the more ancient churches founded by apostles and apostolic men jealous, right, and envious. Okay, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem are saying, hey, we're older and we're first before Constantinople. So that's going to cause a little ruffling of feathers. Now, what's also going to happen is Pope Leo III will anoint Charlemagne, Charles Martel's grandson, as what emperor in the West. Okay, Holy Roman Emperor in the West. That, of course, is going to be seen as a usurpation by the emperor in the East. He says, hey, that would be my job to appoint somebody. What's the Pope doing that for? Okay? Now, also in the East, Caesaropapism, precisely because of Constantine's close control of the church and his sons as well. you're going to see the bishops and patriarchs of the East much more influenced and controlled by the government. Okay? So that Caesaropapism is also going to say, I don't want you loyal to the Pope that's way over there. I want you to be loyal to me. Okay? So all of these things are going to cause jealousy and friction between the East and the West. Okay? Now, about 100 years before the actual schism, not quite, maybe more like 60 years, we had what's called the Phocian schism. Photius, Patriarch of Constantinople, is saying, hey, these Latin missionaries that are in my territory doing Latin rite, no, get out of here. I'll send my Greek missionaries up there. And the Pope is saying they have the right to preach the gospel just as much as you do. And so Photius basically is excommunicating these Latin missionaries, and the Pope is, well, the Pope, has a right to place bishops. And so he puts in a Latin bishop at Constantinople. I believe his name's Alexander. And of course, there's going to be those who, said, no, we're going to be faithful to Photius over here. We're not going to listen to this Latin usurper. Okay, so there's actually a schism at this point. Now, it's mended by the fact that Alexander is obliging enough to die. And so the Pope says to Photius, if you will recognize my authority, I will put you back in power. Well, Photius agrees, but the wound is there, right? Okay, now, in comes Michael Cellularius as the next patriarch of Constantinople, a generation or two later. And he starts to excommunicate the Latin Rite Christians in his area and causing them some trouble and telling them you've got to use leaven rather than unleavened bread, etc., okay? And so Pope Leo IX sends Cardinal Humbert there to correct the situation. Well, Leo dies in the meantime. By the way, he's a reforming pope, and Cardinal Humbert, they're fighting over Simoniac practices back in Europe too, okay? So Humbert comes, there's an altercation, and he takes a bill of excommunication, stomps into Hagia Sophia, the sea church of Constantinople, the cathedral of Constantinople, and puts the bill of excommunication on the high altar. Take that. And Michael Cellularius basically says, you can't excommunicate me, I excommunicate you. So he excommunicates Pope Leo, who by the way is dead already. Okay, and besides, can you excommunicate a pope? Okay, all right. So that is 1054. Now the popes immediately try to start healing this wound in church unity. We'll see the Council of Florence and Constance and things like that. And so it's not just modern times. Now, by the way, that excommunication did not get lifted until Paul VI and Anaxagoras, the Patriarch of Constantinople, lifted that back in 1964, I believe. Okay, and then since then, we've of course seen Pope John Paul, Pope Benedict, and Pope Francis. I mean, it's really exciting to see Patriarch Kirill meeting with Pope Francis last month. That is like a wow, because that's the first time the Russian Orthodox have talked to the Catholic Church. The Greeks have been friendly since Paul VI. Okay, go back to, yes?
Sister, had it been like 1,000 years since we talked?
A little under, maybe about 960 roughly, but anyway, you might be right. Okay, anyway, shall we? So that was the reason for it. Now, why is there a continued separation? Is because, again, the Greeks would say conciliarism. It's councils, not popes, that rule the church. The pope is first among equals, so there's a lack of recognition of the pope's primacy. And they would say, basically, a pope can't define things without a council. Okay? So they would accuse us of Catholic heresies such as the Assumption, because Pope Pius XII did that in 1950 without a council. And the earliest one would be the Filioque controversy. You know how we say, I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord and giver of life, who proceeds from the Father,
And his son.
and the Son is Filioque. That was added by Pope Honorius without a council. Okay, so they see that as the Catholic heresy too. That no, the Spirit proceeds only from the Father through the Son. We say from the Father and the Son, and they're going like, okay, fine, your formula's great, we'll go with it. But the reason they have a hang up with it is not that it's a heresy, but because the Pope said it, okay? And then there's also nationalism. Again, you try to talk with the Greek Patriarch and the Russian Orthodox Patriarch gets mad at you because you didn't talk to him too. You get, okay. So, although, as I say, great strides are being made, please pray for Christian unity. As Pope St. John Paul put it, let's pray that the church can breathe with both lungs again. Okay.
Both lungs, she said.
East and west, both lungs. Okay, now the Crusades. Okay, now the Crusades means literally taking up the cross. Okay, so what happens is at the time period, 1096, Urban II, who's again a reforming pope doing things to turn the church around in Europe, gets an appeal from the Eastern Emperor saying, help, help, the Muslims are taking over, come help me, okay? So he's saying, here's an opportunity to heal the Eastern Schism. We're going to go to the help of our Eastern Christian brothers, and maybe we can reunify the church, okay? And also, by the way, during this whole time that the Muslims had taken over the Palestine area, brave Christians were still making the pilgrimage to walk where Jesus walked. But what was happening is many of these pilgrims, sometimes they would be let in with safe passage if they had enough gold. But a lot of them were getting killed or sold into slavery. Okay, so the Muslims were enslaving them. So what happens is Urban II asks Peter the Hermit to preach, let's go and free the Holy Lands and help our Christian brothers who are being under attack, okay? Now a lot of people, I know the myth is that those poor Muslims, they were just living there peacefully, minding their own business, and these mean old Christians came and beat them up. Well, it's kind of like, no. The Muslims had taken over Christian lands that had been Christian since the time of its foundation. And they were going back to, really, they weren't going to convert Muslims, they were going to just make it safe so that pilgrims could go and walk where Jesus walked. Okay? They were under attack. Okay, now, the first, I don't have time to go through this thing in a lot of detail, but the First Crusade is the only one that was really successful, right? We see the creation of the 5 Latin kingdoms. And by the way, we think of, or especially if you've, the Kingdom of Heaven movie with Orlando Bloom and things like that, you see these crusaders portrayed as their motivations are impure. They're going there for land and power, and like second sons of the nobility are going to find a kingdom for themselves. If you actually look at the historical records, it's the father of the family, or the eldest son of the family that's going to fight the Crusades. And they're going into debt, as in they're having to pay for all this, travel and expenses. These families that are going into debt. In other words, they're doing it for that pure motive of, freeing the Holy Lands, being able to walk where Jesus walked, and to help Eastern Christians. That is, now, sometimes it's going to horribly misfire. Like in the Fourth Crusade, it's an utter disaster. The Pseudo-Crusade, where they actually loot and pillage and take over Byzantium. Oops. And that's, by the way, why the Orthodox always bring that up, right? And that is a huge wedge between East and West, is that misfired crusade, the Fourth Crusade. Okay, but what we see is the establishment of the Latin kingdoms. So you can see that over there. We have the Principality of Armenia, County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Tripoli, the Kingdom of Jerusalem. But you can also see that it's surrounded by an Islamic sea. Okay? So they are able to maintain this for about 50 years. And then it starts to be attacked and chipped away. And that's when Eugene III, as we get the cries of distress from the Latin kingdom saying, come help, we're getting taken over, that Bernard preaches the Crusades, and they come. Unfortunately, the German, the French, and the English who answer that call don't get along with each other, and they decide to each go their own route. And the only one that gets there is the French king. And when he's there, his forces are so small and weak that he can't really do anything, right? If he had the support of the other two nationalities, they could have probably done something. But because he was the only one, his forces were obviously tactically impossible to succeed. We'll see several more attempts, but the Crusaders are more and more losing ground. Now, it's during this time that Francis of Assisi will talk to a Muslim leader and try to convert him, Saladin's nephew, as I recollect. And will actually get some progress in that Francis's nonviolent request actually leads to the Franciscans being the protectors of many of the holy sites in the Holy Land. To this day, they're Franciscan holdings, because the Muslim leaders did give the Franciscans safe passage. Anybody that's under your protection will be allowed to come in unharmed. And now, by the way, very solid policy for a couple hundred years now is you might fight each other, but nobody hurts the pilgrims because they're dollars, right? They're money. So a lot of people are scared to make pilgrimage to the Holy Land, but I'd say both Muslims, Jews, as well as Christians that are in the Holy Lands usually watch out for the pilgrims so that they don't get hurt. Okay. The very last Crusades, like I said, I don't have time to go through everything. The very last Crusades are led by St. Louis of France, Louis IX. So the grandson of Hugh Capet, if I remember correctly. So the first crusade he leads is 1248 to 54, and when he comes back with a crown of thorns and builds Sainte-Chapelle, which is like a wall of glass, because this is the age of the cathedrals, Gothic architecture. Yes? Okay, so for example, at Saint-Denis, Suger, who's the abbot there, a Cluniac abbot, and friend of Bernard, is building the first great Gothic cathedral at Saint-Denis, where the burial place for the Capetian kings. Okay, so Louis does that, and then his younger brother Charles convinces him to go on pilgrimage again, on crusade again, and this time he dies in Tunis. When the Muslims had St. Louis for ransom, they were actually so impressed with his holiness that they invited him, if he converted, that they would make him a leader in their country. That's how impressed they were with St. Louis. Very holy man. I wish I had more time. By the way, a Franciscan tertiary, as well as a supporter of St. Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure, ate at his table and things like that. So as you can see, I'm kind of going all over the place. Okay, now basic reasons why the Crusades failed is long-distance war. You've got French knights, say, wearing cotton batting to keep the chafing of the mail and the armor in 120-degree temperatures. Riding horses, Clydesdale-sized horses, to carry the weight of their armor, versus Arabian warriors wearing cotton and very light armor, riding Arabian horses, which are like the ancestors of our racehorses. So they're like running circles around him. Just get that knight knocked off his horse and he's gone, All right. And then the infighting of the different nationalities, as I was talking about in the Second Crusade. They did get together. Okay, there's a lot more to that history. We could just have a class on that. But there you go. And these in the corner would be religious orders. I know that really weird hybrid of warriors that were also religious. I know it's strange, but true. And by the way, if you look at the Knights Templar, their habit, their kind of in the middle there. Yeah, the middle one. If you notice, they're wearing all white. The Templars used the Cistercian order, the Cistercian rule for themselves. And in fact, St. Bernard played a huge part in their foundation. Okay, so much more to the story, but we've got to move on. Okay, so really quickly, the benefits of these crusades. Just run through it quickly. The strengthening of faith, Christian faith. By the way, the Crusades were not really seen as something evil until basically the Enlightenment. Well, Martin Luther didn't like them either, but everybody else saw them as heroic expressions of Christian faith. It's only in our times that they're seen as horrible, mean things that happen. Okay? It promoted Christian knighthood. These petty feudal lords who were fighting each other are now fighting a common enemy. We see the rise of this idea of you defend women and children. All this idea is coming from there. We're also going to see an introduction of Eastern products that are going to lead to trade, which is going to cause that huge societal shift between feudalism and a more merchant, money-based economy. And then, of course, the adoption of Arabic numerals with the concept of zero, which is going to lead to higher math and progress in that area. If you can imagine doing higher math with Roman numerals. Not possible. Okay, and let's not neglect that because the Muslims are fighting a defensive war, they are not expanding into Europe anymore, right? So it'll keep Islam out of Europe for about 200 years. Okay, we'll see a resurgence when the Ottoman Turks start to attack a little bit later. Okay, now, I was also talking about, we're also talking about corruption in the church at this time, right? Due to feudalism and different chaotic forces happening. So, obviously, the causes of this anti-clericalism, as in people angry with and upset with priests, is because the clergy was seriously abusing. Now, just like today, though, not everybody was doing it. Maybe a larger portion of them are doing it now. But there were also good people, right? Like even Chaucer, in his Canterbury Tales, talks about the good, simple priest who practices what he preaches, even as he makes fun of the monks and the nuns that are, in their furs and have their hawk on their shoulder, whatever. He does recognize there are some good people out there too. Okay, so let's not say that it was just all bad, but there was enough bad that people were turned off by the clergy. Okay, so we have the impatience and critical spirit of the laity, and also, of course, we've got barons and kings who are strapped for cash, and here's the church lands that have so much. Here's a source of income for me. So it's going to be a lot of that happening. Okay? Now, there were a lot of manifestations. I can't go through everything. So we're just going to look at two of the manifestations. And one of these is Waldensianism, Peter Waldo, or Pedro Valdez, if you like that, or Pierre Valois, I don't know. But he's a merchant of Lyon, which would be southern France. And he's very wealthy, but he has a conversion. So that if you would, he's like a parallel to St. Francis, okay? And he starts, after his conversion, he gives away all of his money. He starts to live poorly. However, he's highly critical of the priests who are like charging money for sacraments, very worldly. And so he's living a very simple life, a very poor life. And the people start to say, well, here's an authentic reformer, right? He has the appearance of, and a lot of what he's saying is true and good. But he was also starting to fall into an ancient heresy known as Donatism. And that would be, it's the holiness of the minister that makes the sacrament valid instead of the power of Christ in the sacrament. So it's a revisiting of that old heresy. And so he's saying it's not actually ordination but the poverty of the minister that makes him a more valid administrator, especially of absolution. And in the end, Peter Waldo and his followers will be called Waldensians. And by the way, they're not, you don't see many of them. In fact, I have never seen any here in the United States. If you go over to Europe, you'll see them in almost any major city. There will be a Waldensian church. So they're a pre-Protestant church. They're not Protestants, but they are similar to Protestants, okay? They deny purgatory. They say it's just a money-making scheme. All oaths are sinful. If you take it literally what Jesus said, say, let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. Anything else is from the devil. And then also lay ministers of the Eucharist. Okay, so you don't need a priest. You just need a holy poor lay person who can say the Mass. Okay. Now the other one would be Albigensianism, and this takes place in Albi in the county of Languedoc in southern France. Okay, it's basically a revisiting of Manichaeism. Okay, God made this good spirit, and then the devil or the bad god made the matter as evil. And because of that, they would say if all matter is depraved, then marriage is bad because you're trapping good spirits in matter when you have a baby, right? So infanticide would have been encouraged, marriage discouraged. And of course, God would not take on evil matter, right? So there's a denial of the incarnation. Now, they have one sacrament, kind of a simplified, streamlined thing that you receive right before you die, called the consolamentum. Now, there are two castes in the Albigensian heresy. If you would, the Cathari, which is the Greek word for the pure ones. Okay, Catherine means pure one. Okay, so the Cathari are living very abstemious, poor, penitential lives, both men and women. And they would be the administrators of this consolamentum. Now, the other half would be, the other caste are the believers. And that would be people who are following the Cathari. They basically are living a very loose life. I'm not going to get married, but I'm going to have a good time. Just basically, you can do what you like, what you want. You don't have to follow any oaths. No obligation to anybody. Just live, party, and when it's close to death, then get a Cathari to come and give you the consolamentum, and you die. And by the way, if you fail to die, they will be happy to smother you with a pillow or something to make sure you go to heaven. Okay. And by the way, they would consider saints to the endura, starving yourself to death, would have been considered the greatest form of sanctity. Okay, because you're getting rid of the material part of yourself. Okay, now enter Dominic. Yeah, 10 minutes left of class, and I finally get to the title of the talk. Okay, Dominicans. Okay, Dominic Guzman is born in 1170. He is the third son of Felix and Juana Guzman, born roughly around 1170. At first, he is educated by his uncle, the archpriest, Gumiel, and later at the University of Palencia. So he gets a degree, a master's in theology. He then joins the Canons Regular. Now, if you remember, the Canons Regular, that doesn't mean weapons of war that are regularly shut off. Okay, what that means is, did you get what I just said? Okay, all right. A canon is a priest associated with the cathedral church of the bishop, and they would be like the bishop's helper. Now, canons had basically been a part of the reform since 1050, okay? And what they would do is whereas a lot of diocesan priests were corrupt, these men gathered together to live in community, to live poverty, kind of live a monastic life. But unlike the monks, they ran parishes and did apostolic work for the bishop. Okay, so regular comes from the Latin word regula, meaning a rule. So they're canons living under a rule. And most popular among the canons would be the rule of St. Augustine. If you remember, he established a canon regular around him in Hippo. He's the origins of that. Okay, so and by the way, they adopt the white Cistercian habit to show that they're part of the reform. Okay, so the white is what the canons in Osma wore. Now, very soon, even though he was relatively young, Dominic becomes sub-prior of these canons and becomes a key advisor to the bishop. Now, the bishop on his part, the Bishop of Osma, we're talking about northern Spain, southern France, okay? It's kind of a small, poor diocese, but he decides he wants to go be a missionary to the Hungarians, which is one of the few barbarian tribes yet to be converted. And so he goes to Innocent III. Well, Innocent III himself is kind of like a new Gregory VII, very strong. He is only 30 years old when he was elected, on the same day that his uncle, the Pope, died. Okay, so he comes in strong, vigorous, and he is going to reform things. I mean, Gregory started the ball rolling. Innocent is going to make it happen. Okay, and a little bit, always motivated by the kingdom of Christ, but sometimes kind of strong in how he does it. Anyway, he actually goes to the Cistercians and say, I want you to go to Languedoc and deal with the Albigensians. So he commissions 2 Cistercians to go and preach the gospel. Well, they proceed to take a great escort, also panoply and fanfare, etc. Well, when Dominic and Don Diego come to say, we want to be missionaries to the Hungarians, he said, hey, I've got a better job for you. The Cistercians are not doing so well. Why don't you go help them preach the gospel in Languedoc instead? So Bishop Diego and Dominic will head to work with the Cistercians to preach the gospel to the Albigensians. Okay, now they are going to, of course, wear the white, the Cistercian white, as they preach the gospel. Okay, now they're not very successful. And then Dominic, who kind of looks it over and says, the reason we're not successful, the one single reason we're not successful is the Cathari are dressed poorly, they're going barefoot. It's not just that they have good arguments, that if you're not well educated in theology, you might not be able to refute him. He sees the need for that. And he's going, his degree in theology, of course, is standing him in good stead to preach to the Cathari and convert them. But they're not listening to me because here I am having, 20 escorts, we're riding horses, and we're the rich, corrupt church in the eyes of the people. So he goes to the bishop and says, we have got to re-image ourselves, or we're not going to be heard. And so Dominic, from this time on, will go barefoot. He'll never ride a horse. He and the bishop will walk from place to place. And the bishop will die in about 1207. Well, by that time, he does have, he's got some success in conversions. And there's a group of Cathari women who have come back to the faith, have abjured the heresy, but they want to continue to live a life of austerity and prayer. And so he founds them, if you would. The Dominican nuns got founded first. Okay? So these women will be the prayer support at Pruillo in Languedoc. Okay? And from there, he will gather other men around him. And then in 1217, after Innocent III dies, the next pope will send a congratulatory note to Dominic and his 16 followers, which basically is the approval for the order. So even though they're a tiny number, they're not growing like the Franciscans. By the way, the Franciscans are happening at the same time too. Okay, so they're not growing gangbusters like the Franciscans, but these 16 men are 6 of them are from Spain, a couple of them are from France, one's from England. You get the idea. They're rather international in who's come to help Francis or Dominic. Okay, now what happens is Francis, of course, is doing his own thing. We'll talk about him next, okay? So he's going all over Italy and proclaiming the gospel his ways. Well, Dominic wants to say, if we're going to not become corrupt like the Cistercians and other orders, we need to have radical poverty. Well, at first people are saying, nope, 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 can't do that, that's impossible. Well, he talks to Francis, they meet in Rome, probably in the house of Cardinal Hugoline, who is the cardinal protector for both orders. And Francis, they meet, they're simpatico, and Francis encourages Dominic to go ahead with the radical poverty. Okay, so they do that, and then now the order does continue to keep growing slowly, not nearly the way the Franciscans do. But Dominic, almost as soon as he gets the approval, he starts sending his men out 2 by 2 throughout the world. So they don't just stay in one spot. They're like going everywhere in Europe. And they especially say, if we're going to win the minds and hearts of people, we have to do more than just preach the gospel. We also need to convert the intellectuals of our time. And so he goes to the universities, and he has his men get master's degrees in theology, so that they can, not just so they can fight heretics, but so they can be good religious that understand why they're doing what they're doing. Okay? So, and in fact, we're going to see in our next section, we'll look at some of these Dominicans and Franciscans too, that have become masters in these universities and spreading the gospel and helping to recreate society through education. But that's next time. Let's continue. Okay, so in the general chapter of 1220, Pentecost, in Bologna, the general chapter agrees to the radical poverty. Now, the Dominican poverty is different than the Franciscan in the sense that they obviously can own books, they need to get an education, things like that. But as far as owning property, getting any type of benefices, the answer is no. We've got to be free to travel throughout the world, to be missionaries, and to preach the gospel. Okay? Dominic will die on the Feast of the Transfiguration, just a year after that, in Bologna. But because of his great organizational skills, the Dominicans and the adaptability, they adopt the Augustinian rule, but also the Dominican constitutions are so adaptable to all the different international places they might be, that they've actually never had to rewrite that constitution. Now, obviously they had their own problems and reforms that they needed to do. But what we're going to see with Francis is a little bit more rough writing for the next generation after Francis. But the Dominicans, the way Dominic organizes the order, they're called the Order of Preachers, OP, right? Okay. And by the way, this famous little painting up here, you can see the Dominicans preaching among the heretics, and the heretics tearing their books up. And you can also see these little black and white dogs, the Dominicani, the hounds of God, Dominicanes. Yes, the pun is intended. And you can see the one little dog is biting the neck of a wolf, the heretic, right? Okay, so I just thought that was cute, I had to include it. Okay, so Francis Bernardone. Should I stop here?
Like I said, Mass is at 11:30, so we got a little window if you want to complete.
Well, I hope I'll do him justice. We could again spend 75 minutes just on Francis, and he gets 5 minutes. I'm sorry. Okay. So Francis Bernardone, the eldest son of Pietro Bernardone, a wool merchant of Assisi. And he names his eldest Francis because that is where France is where he made most of his money. So it's like, this is I think, one of the first people ever to be named Francis. How about, he will not be the last name Francis, though. Okay. There's an old joke that goes, guy's in a plane and he's always choosing the wrong plane or train, right? So he's on this plane that's like the engines have stopped and it's going down and he's going, Francis, St. Francis, help me. And the his arm comes down and catches him and says, "Thank you, St. Francis." And he says, "Which St. Francis?" Okay, anyway. Back to the original Francis. Now, as you can see there, up there, I have a couple of elements. We're doing this in pictures so fast as I can. Okay, what happens is Francis, of course, his father's a merchant. He's part of that nouveau rich. He's not a noble, but he has dreams that his son will be a noble. So he buys all kinds of things so that Francis can become a knight and become noble that way. And Francis is the life of the party, always very courteous. In fact, if you looked at the crowd of nobles and commoners that were living in Assisi partying together, you would probably have picked out Francis as one of the noblemen because he was so courteous. He was always lots of self-control. If you would, control mixed with impulsivity is in, he could read the situation and just make a party happen. Okay, but at the same time, he could also control himself and not get angry, etc. Okay, well anyhow, again, I only have 5 minutes. Well, at a certain point, he goes to battle Perugia. He gets incarcerated for a year as a prisoner of war until they're able to pay the ransom. Well, in that year in jail, he has, of course, a lot of time to think, and the other prisoners, I don't know if he drove them crazy or they helped their morale, but he was cheerful and happy even in prison. Anyway, he gets out, he's sick, and in his long recovery, he starts to, take his faith more seriously, has some visions, and eventually we see the Byzantine cross there that spoke to him, the cross of San Damiano. Francis, rebuild my church. Well, he at first thinks that's rebuild the San Damiano, it's just crumbling into pieces. So he begs rocks off of people and builds it. At a certain point, his father says, "Tell this wastrel son of mine to give me back my property." And so Francis basically strips off all his clothes and hands the money that he has left to his father and said, "From here on out, I'm only going to say, 'Our Father who art in heaven.'" And so they break. Okay, so that's the one scene by Giotto there where the bishop is kind of like, "Woo! Let's put you in a hermit cart." Okay, now, eventually, at first he's thought to be crazy, but eventually his old drinking buddies and friends join him and are converted. And there's some controversy because, of course, he looks like he might be a Waldensian, right? Or some other anti-clerical movement happening. And so some people are saying he's good, some people are saying he's bad. So he decides he's going to let the Pope decide. And this is Innocent III, the same Pope that Dominic is dealing with, right? So Francis walks to Rome with 12 of his brothers. The only reason the Pope, or Innocent, probably talked to him is because he did have Cardinal Ugolino introduced him, and also that he had a letter of recommendation from the Bishop of Assisi. Okay, so he gets in. Well, Innocent just the night before had a dream of a little man in a gray hermit's outfit holding up the church. So you have the center thing by Duccio there of the Pope sleeping and seeing this dream. And when he meets Francis, he realizes, oh, this is the man. And so he approves Francis. They go back. The Franciscans just grow. Gangbusters. I mean, even in Francis's lifetime, 5,000, 6,000 followers. When Dominic dies, maybe a couple hundred. Okay, so it really takes off. Now, there's all kinds of legends about Francis, so just cut to the chase. Of course, you got the famous Sermon of the Birds. He says, preach the gospel always, sometimes use words, You can see him talking with Saladin's nephew there. Is like, what do you want from me? I want you to convert. Well, I'm not going to do that. What do you want besides that? Safe passage for pilgrims in the Holy Land. And Francis offers to show you who's the true religion. I am willing to walk into the fire with your imams. And we'll see whoever comes out unharmed, that's the true religion. And to the caliph's shame, none of the imams volunteered. And he says, well, I see that you are more zealous about your faith than we are about ours. Can't give you what you want, but what else can I do for you? So that's when the Franciscans become the protectorates of the Holy Land. Okay? Now, even during his lifetime, his simplicity, he says, our rule is the gospel. Leave everything, depend upon God. So holy poverty, we're betrothed to him, great poet, as well as a great preacher of the gospel. In fact, St. Faustina asked, what saint in all of time is most like you? And he said, Francis is the most perfect follower of all the ages. Okay, the saint that is closest to Christ. Well, except for, of course, Mary and Joseph, but you know what I mean. Okay. Now, in the last part of his life, very sick, eye disease, going blind, very discouraged because the people that were following him were kind of going a different direction than he intended and what he thought should happen. He goes up to Mount Overno to pray, and there he has the vision of the seraphim, the cross, Jesus as a seraphim, and he receives the stigmata. And so for the last few months of his life, singing the praises of God and how great he is, this is when the Canticle of the Sun is written, etc. And then he will die there. Now, some of the brilliance of Francis that kind of transforms medieval society is going to be this idea of orders. Now, Dominic is doing something similar with his orders, but Francis is really, how is he transforming society? The first order of Francis, the order of Friars Minor, would be the friars, some of them priests, a few priests, but mostly lay people in the order. So that's the first order, is the men. The second order would be what were called the poor ladies while Clare was alive, but the cloistered poor Clares living in radical poverty without any possessions, basically living off of alms. And then the third order, this is where it really impacted society, is men and women who wanted to follow Francis but had families. He says, well, don't abandon your families, but you can still live this radical gospel poverty, not by giving away everything, but by living in such a way as to be able to take care of your family, but also to take care of the poor, etc. Okay, and by the way, in our own diocese, we still have the tertiary Franciscans, right? And these tertiary Franciscans would include Saint Louis of France, Saint Elizabeth of Portugal, Saint Rose of Vitebro. Okay, we could just do a whole, I could go on for a long more time, but you'd be late for Mass. So we'll have to end here because it's probably time for Mass, but thank you. Oh.